It was an ordinary sunny day in New York. The guys on the embankment were filming their vlog, when suddenly a laser beam flew in from the sea. Everything began to collapse. The boy pointed the camera into the fog and saw a huge robot that was shooting laser plasma, but this disaster just couldn't be left, so Iron Man tried to stop him. Suddenly the robot exploded and pieces from the robot flew into people, but Tony Stark reacted quickly and saved people, and he was shown on TV. Tony Stark, along with Rhodey, was heading to his Stark Tower. Pepper was already waiting for them there. She transmitted information that there was now an attack on the city from Hydra villains in the form of a large octopus robot. Many armed soldiers descended from this octopus, and Tony went to the garage to put on his suit and prevent the destruction of the city. At that time, the octopus was destroying the city, but Iron Man did not let it be done. He destroyed the octopus. There was only something to do with the soldiers. His little rockets did everything for him. Tony was about to leave when suddenly 3 more large robots arrived. There was one problem: 30% of the charge remained in the suit. Tony tried to fight them off, but there were too many of them. The robots had the same technology as Tony. He realized that they somehow stole them. The last robot remained, and the S.H.I.E.L.D. agency and people in suits who descended from the S.H.I.E.L.D. airship came to the rescue. When they finished with everyone, they wanted to arrest Iron Man, but he was not going to give up so easily. Suddenly one of the Hydra robots woke up from behind and tried to kill the people from the S.H.I.E.L.D. Iron Man saw this and wanted to shoot the robot, and the people from the S.H.I.E.L.D. thought he wanted to shoot them and started shooting at him. Iron Man directed all his energy into the beam and shot at the robot with the last of his strength. Stark boarded the ship and began to resent why the S.H.I.E.L.D. shared Stark's developments with Hydra, but the S.H.I.E.L.D. agency was not to blame. Meanwhile, the S.H.I.E.L.D. agency flew to a special prison for villains to put all the Hydra people in jail. All the villains passed through the scanner. Suddenly one of them noticed some kind of weapon in his hands. Everyone took out a weapon, but it was too late. He killed everyone with his sword. Fury was walking down the corridor and suddenly the alarm went off. The villain who killed the guards came out in front of Fury. Fury realized that the whole plan to capture the city was not real. They specifically wanted to go to prison to free the head of Hydra. A fight began between Fury and the villain, in which the villain won. He freed the head of Hydra and they began to fly away, but Fury was strong enough. He jumped on a flying car and threw him out. All the villains were arrested and returned back to prison. Once in the port, 4 villains tried to steal Stark's weapon. The police tried to prevent it, but nothing worked because they were strong. Suddenly, the god of thunder Thor appeared out of nowhere. He hit one with a hammer so hard that he flew several meters away. The villains were not going to give up just like that and gave a strong rebuff to Thor. They dropped the container on Thor and thought they had already won, but Thor would not have been a god of thunder if he had just given up. He threw his hammer and dealt a strong blow to the villains. The hammer flew away somewhere. But one of them took a medic hostage who was trying to provide medical assistance to the police. The villain did not know that the hammer always returns to the Torah, and a hammer flew right into the back of his head. The villains were finished. Suddenly a portal to Asgard opened in the sky, and from it he was told that Asgard was in danger and Thor flew into it. Meanwhile, in Asgard there was an attack by some snowmen. They destroyed the guards and entered the city without any problems. Suddenly a man came after them. It was Thor's brother. His name was Loki. He could turn into any animals or people. He controlled these monsters. Suddenly Thor jumps out of the portal. He can't let the monsters destroy his city any further. Thor summoned lightning and struck it at the villains. They were finished, but there was still his brother Loki who also tried to kill Thor. But after a long fight, Thor put him in shackles and brought him to his father, whose father's name was Odin, sent Loki to the Island of Silence, where he would not be able to use his tricks. The father told Thor to prepare to replace him and sit on the throne, but Thor refused because his help is needed on Earth for ordinary mortals. And Thor returned to Earth. It turns out that it was Loki who staged the attack of monsters in the port so that Loki captured Asgard while Thor rescues the police at the port. A man walks through the desert and is already approaching the city of Las Vegas. He behaves so that no one paid attention to him. Already approaching the hotel, he meets the gaze of a policeman who was driving past him. The policeman, noticing a strange man, turns around, but the man noticed it and ran. The man ran into the alley and the policeman ran past without noticing it. There was something wrong with this man. His eyes turned green. Meanwhile, the local special forces were trying to find him. The man tried to find one person and found his geolocation in the laptop. He went into a cafe and sat down next to the huge man he was looking for. He had a few questions for him. He wanted him to tell about the prison he was in, but he was covered with iron and threw him out into the street. Suddenly, the man began to turn into someone. It was Bruce and he was the Hulk. Now a battle was coming for them, and in the meantime several military helicopters were flying in their direction. The Hulk had crushing blows, and another monster could be covered with metal, stone, or even sand. The Hulk was about to deliver the final blow, when suddenly a rocket flew at him from somewhere. A lot of military equipment was moving in his direction, which shot at him, but the Hulk easily fought off these attacks and eventually he smashed all military equipment. But that wasn't all. A shield plane flew in from somewhere, from which an archer and a Black Widow jumped out. They didn't know what the Hulk was capable of yet. The battle began, but suddenly another rocket flew right into them. But the Hulk with his body blocked the others from this rocket, and from such a powerful explosion he flew into a mountain that crashed right onto the shield plane. The plane began a rapid nose-down fall. The Hulk did not let this happen. He grabbed the plane and held it, thereby saving the pilot from death. But the archer electrocuted the Hulk and the Hulk turned back into Bruce. They flew to the most terrible prison to imprison Bruce. They took his blood and hid it as a sample. The most terrible villains were kept in this prison. The archer went to Bruce's cell and asked why he saved the ship with his people, because he could have just run away and thus would not have ended up in prison. Bruce said that he knows everything. He knows why blood is taken from prisoners. It is taken to create an army of the same as them. Leaving the cell, the archer noticed how the Black Widow was sneaking into the vault and decided to follow her, and he saw how she stole the Hulk's blood. Bruce boarded the plane and watched a recording of Black Widow calling someone and saying that no one suspects that she stole the Hulk's blood. The archer realized that something was wrong here. Meanwhile, the Black Widow was heading by car towards the desert, and an archer was watching her from the air to understand what she was doing. She stopped at the car and people were already waiting for her on the road. He had to pass something. The Black Widow started to transmit something, but the archer stopped her. Black Widow gave false information to the plane that Archer was a triple agent and he was arrested. The archer was Hawkeye. Meanwhile, a mysterious character was watching a story about how SHIELD agents tried to sneak onto the island unnoticed. They had a mission to destroy the Hydra research base, but they were discovered and started firing at them. Captain America came to the rescue and he knocked out the machine gunner and they began to move on. Approaching the goal, a squad of villains stood in their way, which Captain America scattered in different directions without any problems. But that was not all. When they entered the huge castle, a huge monster came out at them, which was difficult to defeat. Since this monster had more strength, Captain America decided to beat him with his mind. He lured him onto the bridge and blew it up. The monster flew into the abyss. Passing through the castle, they noticed monsters that were placed in capsules. Suddenly a voice spoke. It was a Red Skull, and immediately Captain America and Bucky were surrounded and their weapons were taken away. The Red Skull told about the plan. He wanted to send all these monsters to one world, to which he has a portal. He said that there is a rainbow bridge in this world. The Red Skull opened the portal and some powerful god began to get out, but Captain America knocked down the guards and cut off the electricity, because the monsters are now free. Captain America ordered Bucky to close the portal while he was fighting monsters, but Bucky had a lot of soldiers in his way. While Bucky was dealing with the soldiers, Captain America disabled the portal and the mighty god disappeared. The building began to collapse, but the Red Skull was still at large. The Red Skull almost managed to fly away on his rocket, but the captain and Bucky managed to grab it. The captain tried to get the Red Skull out of the cockpit, but he turned on some kind of timer and ejected. It wasn't just a timer, it was a countdown bomb. The captain and Bucky had 30 seconds. The captain ordered Bucky to jump, and meanwhile Bucky got stuck in the stairs. The captain tried to save him, but Bucky realized that they didn't have enough time and pushed Captain America away so that the captain could escape. The tanks exploded along with the rocket and Captain America went to the bottom of the ocean. The mysterious character was Kong. He came from the future, claiming that he must kill Captain America and conquer the Earth to save it from destruction. Suddenly the planet on which Kong lived began to collapse and he went on a ship away from this place. Meanwhile, a group of military men was heading through the jungle to one person. This man did not know at that time that the military was coming to him and he was just studying one crystal. Suddenly the door was broken and the military burst in and pointed weapons at him. They requested the results of the studies and the crystal. But the man was not going to give what they asked for. He shrank in size and began to scatter all the military one by one. It was the Ant-Man. One of the military inserted a crystal into his gun and started firing ultrasound. The Ant-Man pressed a button and the room began to fill with some substance. A group of military men went outside and noticed that the whole environment had increased many times. It turns out that the Ant-Man had reduced them and now it seems to them that everything has grown in size. As a result, the Ant-Man left only one person in consciousness and then he ran away without looking back. The Ant-Man returned to his broken laboratory and the Wasp Girl flew to him and together they continued to study the crystal further. Ant-Man returned to the city to make it easier to study the crystal, and when suddenly the city began to shake, Ant-Man thought it was an earthquake, but in fact it was a villain named Whirlwind. He turned into a tornado and demolished everything in his path. The Wasp Woman tried to stop him herself. She sent a swarm of wasps at him, and while he was fighting them off, she decided with the Ant-Man what they would do with the Whirlwind. They sent him to a prison called the Big House. The Whirlwind tried to escape, but suddenly a big hand pressed him from the roof. It was Ant-Man. He reduced this prison to such a size that no one could escape from it. All this was happening on an airship of the S.H.I.E.L.D. agency. He offered them to work for them, but Ant-Man refused this offer. Meanwhile, the Whirlwind was trying to get out of this little prison, but it was not working. Suddenly, a mutant spoke from a nearby prison cell. He was a mathematician and he calculated 11 ways to escape from this prison, but he did not escape. He told a strange idea that the system would soon collapse and all the villains would escape from prison. Meanwhile, in the country of Wakanda, an electoral battle was taking place. It consisted in the fact that the Black Panther was fighting against a huge fighter for who would sit on the throne of Wakanda. The fight began and the Black Panther successfully dodged the opponent's blows. He defeated his opponent, but suddenly someone pointed an ultrasonic cannon at him and started shooting at him. His opponent took advantage of this and started beating him. It was unfair on the part of the opponent. The opponent's name was Baku and he won. It was an unfair victory. Now he was the king of Wakanda. Meanwhile, Iron Man's satellite reported information that somewhere in the mountains there is some kind of illegal base where Stark's stolen weapons were. Iron Man almost immediately arrived at this place and scattered all the villains around. The case was over and it was possible to go home. At the same time, Thor was standing on a skyscraper and talking to his partner who had just arrived from Asgard. Thor looked down and saw one of the cars flying straight into a medic who was saving someone's life. It's good that Thor was able to react and this car did not have time to fly. Everyone went about their business. Iron Man delivered the villains to prison and Ant-Man interrogated the prisoner in prison. Suddenly, the power went out in the prison and all the prison cells opened. All the villains were now free. The prison began to increase in size. The prison was on the S.H.I.E.L.D. airship. The ship began to fall and break apart due to the fact that the prison was getting bigger and bigger. The villains who got out of prison got out by destroying S.H.I.E.L.D. agents on their way and creating lawlessness. Bruce was covered with iron debris and he could not get up. An ordinary worker came to the rescue and helped him pull him out. Bruce needed to find the Hulk's blood that was pumped out of him. Meanwhile, the villains made their way into the room with weapons, but Hawkeye did not let them do it. This lawlessness could not continue and the S.H.I.E.L.D. ship, which had already landed on the water and was already sinking, arrived Iron Man. There was the most dangerous prisoner in this prison and he was released. At that moment, Bruce couldn't hold back and he turned into the Hulk. Now there was more chance of winning. Iron Man realized that he alone could not cope and decided to blow up the entire building. The explosion hit his suit and he fell. His assistant Jarvis informed him that villains had escaped from all three prisons. The most dangerous criminal who could control gravity got out. His name was Graviton. In the past he owned a laboratory in which he conducts his most important experiment. Suddenly there was an explosion and he blacked out. When he came to, he was strapped in because there was a lot of radiation in him. He started uncontrollably destroying the room. I didn't understand how he did it, but they managed to put gas into the room, which put him to sleep. He went to prison and he spent all this time in it. But now all the prisons were open and now Graviton, along with all the villains, were free. Graviton wanted to take revenge on Fury. He lifted him into the air and began to strangle him with gravity, but Thor did not let him kill him and hit Graviton with his hammer. Meanwhile, Iron Man tried to fly to the base, but his suit finally broke down. He ordered Jarvis to remotely call another suit to him. It only remained to wait. Meanwhile, Thor was fighting Graviton over the city and his lightning could not damage Graviton since Graviton controlled gravity. Graviton sent Thor to the bottom of the river and now a Wasp Woman was fighting with him. Meanwhile, Iron Man changed his suit and was already flying up to the place of battle. He hit Graviton with all speed and he fell into the water. But that wasn't all. Graviton hit Iron Man so hard that he flew into space. Seeing all this, Ant-Man enlarged himself to a giant size and tried to grab Graviton, but there was no limit to the possibilities of Graviton, and he easily threw the ant away. Graviton wanted to show the whole world his strength and began to lift part of the city into the air. Thor could not let him do it and hit Graviton and part of the city landed back in its place, but Graviton could not stop. He began to destroy the city and panic people. Suddenly a green monster appeared. It was the Hulk and he wanted to smear Graviton on the wall. Through Graviton to another part of the city where it was safe to fight with him and the rest of the superheroes joined the Hulk to finally stop Graviton. But even when they tried to attack Graviton together, he easily repelled their attacks. Graviton realized that it was time to finish with these heroes and began to create a huge tornado. He began to push all the heroes so hard into the ground that they could not even stand up. But the Hulk was so angry that he got out of this attraction and attacked Graviton. Now every superhero could attack Graviton while he was distracted by the Hulk. Each superhero inflicted very heavy damage to Graviton, and as a result, Graviton could not cope with such a power of heroes. Fury arrived at the scene of the battle and reported that there were still 74 villains at large. Iron Man suggested that all superheroes unite and catch all the villains and return them to prison. But there was something else to find out: who hacked the security system and opened all 3 prisons. Tony Stark bought a palace for superheroes and called it the Avengers. In this mansion there was an underground elevator that led to an underground scientific laboratory. There was everything in this laboratory, even high-speed fighters. Also in this lab, there was a training room where they could practice team skills, and the Avengers started training. While the Avengers were going about their business, some woman made her way to their palace. The woman turned into Bruce and convinced the Hulk that the Avengers just wanted to use him. He believed her and left. Since the Hulk could do anything on the street, Thor followed him and tried to stop him, but the Hulk was not himself. The Avengers realized that the Hulk was enchanted and did not control himself. The Avengers tried to stop him, but the Hulk was strong and he did not control himself. The Hulk managed to escape, but suddenly they were attacked by this woman. Her name was Charmer. The Enchantress disarmed all the Avengers and was about to kill Ant-Man, but then the Hulk appeared. He came to his senses and got rid of the Enchantress' control. Thor struck Iron Man with lightning, thereby charging Tony Stark's suit. Now that the Avengers were together, it remained to catch 2 villains. Suddenly the Enchantress opened the portal and entered it. Thor explained that this Enchantress is from Asgard. The Avengers returned to their base and began preparing for the next missions. The Avengers team went in search of the Hulk somewhere in Antarctica. Flying over the ice, they saw a huge crater in it. They thought that the Hulk had done it and that they were already close to it. Suddenly the Iron Man said that his instruments noticed something alive in this crater. They sank into the crater and suddenly noticed the shield of Captain America, and Captain America himself was lying in the ice next to him. They could not believe their eyes. The Avengers brought the captain to their base and began to revive him. The captain came to his senses and from fright began to scatter the Avengers around. He jumped off the Avengers plane, and the burning plane flew on. Meanwhile, the Black Panther infiltrated the Avengers base while they were fighting Captain America, hacked the protection, and for some reason began to study information about the Avengers. Captain America came to his senses and he realized that he had been lying under a layer of ice for many years. At this time, the head of Hydra found out that Captain America was alive and he went to finish him off. His name was Zemo. He wanted to take a DNA sample from Captain America and create a large army with his strength. In the past, Captain America constantly fought with Zemo and tried to stop him. An alarm went off at the Avengers base, which meant that monsters were attacking the city. All the Avengers went to help the city except Captain America and the Wasp Woman. Someone got into the Avengers base. It was Zemo. The battle between the strongest enemies began. Zemo looked more confident in this fight, but the Black Panther came to the rescue, which had long been unnoticed at the Avengers base. Zemo began to lose and he disappeared while Captain America was helping the Wasp Woman. Meanwhile, the Avengers were fighting a villain who stroked them all into himself. But Captain America helped the Avengers get out. Ant-Man understood how to destroy the villain. It was necessary to direct an ultrasonic beam at him and they immediately won. When all the Avengers returned to base, Tony Stark invited the captain to the Avengers and he agreed. Now the Avengers had a full-fledged team of heroes. Meanwhile, a man named Simon came to Stark Tower. He asked Tony not to buy shares of his company since his company was on the collapse, but Tony did not change his mind and Simon threatened to stop him. At the same time, Thor and the Wasp Woman were chasing a criminal who was flying away from them on his invention. Thor decided not to play with him and just threw a hammer at him that shot down the villain's plane. While everyone was fighting, Captain America was at the Avengers base and met the director of the Fury Shield for the first time. He invited him to visit him, saying that he had something for the captain. Meanwhile, Simon was driving in the car and asked for help from his brother named Eric. Eric told where he was taking him. He said that in this place he could be given the power with which Simon would take revenge on Tony Stark. Simon began to prepare for the transformation. Meanwhile, Captain America and Agent Fury came to the barbershop, but not to get a haircut, but to go down to the secret laboratory. The barbershop was just a cover. In this laboratory, Nick Fury handed the captain his motorcycle. which he had not seen for many years. At the same time, the operation to transform Simon began. Suddenly Thor burst into the laboratory with a wasp woman, but it was too late. Simon had already turned into a powerful and evil creature. Stark, meanwhile, was in his tower, when suddenly the building began to shake and Stark flew to the top to see what was going on. It was Simon who was taking revenge for the fact that Stark had taken his company that he had been building all his life. Stark announced a general gathering of the Avengers in order to stop Simon. Ant-Man had almost persuaded Simon to surrender, but Iron Man appeared and began to fight with him. Suddenly they noticed that something was wrong with Simon. He could not cope with such a powerful force. His own force began to destroy him and Iron Man lifted him to his tower to save him, but it was too late. Simon was killed by his own force. Tony Stark explained to the Avengers that he bought his company not to humiliate him, but to save him from bankruptcy. He wanted to continue working with Simon, but he died. The next day came and the whole Avengers team was reviewing the record of how the Black Panther saved the life of Captain America when he fought the villain Zemo. Even the Jarvis system could not determine that the Black Panther had made his way to their castle. Suddenly, an alarm started in the Avengers building and the Avengers ran out into the street. A Black Panther was standing in front of them. He started fighting the Avengers for some reason. His suit was very high-tech since it was made of vibranium. The Avengers managed to grab him, but the Black Panther explained that he started a fight to make sure of their abilities. He took off his mask and under this mask was the Prince of Wakanda. His name was T'Challa. He came for help. His problem was that the king had changed in his country in Wakanda, but he had bad motives. There was a lot of vibranium in this country and he could use it for his bad ideas. The Avengers flew to Wakanda and began to prepare a plan. Iron Man was flying the plane very low and flying up to Wakanda. They were shot down and their plane crashed. Meanwhile, in Wakanda, the king was selling vibranium to people from Hydra and he was given information that a plane was shot down on their territory and at the same time the Avengers broke in and did not let Hydra take the vibranium. But there was something they could not prevent in any way. Vibranium absorbed too much energy and an explosion was supposed to happen. Suddenly an explosion sounded and from vibranium formed a huge monster whose name was Sound. At the same time, the Black Panther was fighting with the King of Wakanda for who would become the new King of Wakanda. Unlike the previous fights for the throne, this was a fair fight in which the Black Panther won. Now he took the throne and avenged his father. But that was not all. The monster named Sound was not stopped yet. Ant-Man figured out how to destroy him. It was necessary to destroy the converter on his chest. Iron Man did this and he succeeded. Everything fell into place. The King of Wakanda T'Challa returned to the throne and the Avengers helped him in this. Black Panther asked to join the Avengers and was accepted. There were more and more Avengers. It's been a few days and night has come. All the Avengers were chasing some man. It was Hawkeye. They drove him into an alley and he had nowhere to run. But suddenly a plane flew up and directed a beam of light at the Avengers and Hawkeye was able to escape because the Avengers were blinded. It was a shield ship and they asked for help from the Avengers. The Avengers went after them and they flew to a prison called a cube. A radiation dome was formed around this prison. Whoever got into the dome zone turned into a monster. The man from the shield said that this dome would soon reach the city and all the people in this city would turn into monsters. They will need to get into this dome and discover the problem. For this the people from the shield have developed suits against radiation. The Avengers entered the dome and 3 monsters came out at them, and while the Avengers were fighting with them, the dome was getting bigger and bigger. Meanwhile, Black Widow was in Hydra's warehouse and was selling Hulk's blood, but Hawkeye broke in because he thought Black Widow was a traitor and that she was working for Hydra. The Avengers went into the cube and started looking for a problem, when suddenly a lot of villains jumped out at them and they began to scatter the Avengers around. But the Avengers quickly sorted them out and noticed that it was too easy. It turns out the villains did not want to defeat the Avengers, they wanted to damage their costumes. The Wasp Woman damaged the costume and now she will also turn into a monster. At the same time, Hawkeye fought the Black Widow and he won, but he decided not to surrender her to the shield. He would take her to the Avengers. While all the Avengers were fighting, the Black Panther got into the center of the dome and destroyed it. The dome was destroyed and all the monsters turned back into people. Behind all this evil was a villain named Leader. He created this dome, but in fact he just wanted to test this dome in small sizes in order to use it on a larger scale. A villain named Leader now launches this dome only in large size to Earth, and the first city that suffered was Las Vegas. The dome expanded very quickly and all the people who got into it turned into monsters. Compared to the previous dome, this dome expanded much faster. Almost all the Avengers have turned into monsters. Thor was immediately captured by the monsters because there were too many of them. Hawkeye decided to find the Hulk because he was a scientist and could figure out this situation. He flew away and left the Black Widow because she could interfere. Meanwhile, the Hulk was hiding in the mountains and the military hunted him because they thought he was a danger. Hawkeye came to the rescue and he destroyed all military equipment. Hawkeye explained to the Hulk that he didn't need a Hulk, but a banner that was inside the Hulk. The Hulk turned into a banner and they went to Banner's laboratory to study the dome and how to disable it. At the same time, Thor was taken to the villain leader and several villains tried to hold him. The leader said that his dome would cover half of the planet in 14 hours. By this time, the Hulk and Hawkeye had already arrived. But for the Hulk there was a rival who looked like him. His name was Abomination. Hawkeye at this time fought with the Avengers who were under the influence of the dome and the villain leader, but he did not come empty-handed. He had arrows that were filled with an antidote. It was the end. The Hulk destroyed the dome and now all the monsters have turned back into people, and the villain leader was sent to prison. Now Hawkeye was also an Avenger. It was an ordinary sunny day in the city. A wasp woman was chasing a villain named Whirlwind. He demolished everything in his path. As a result, she was able to lead him to a dead end at a construction site. Suddenly the whirlwind turned into some kind of woman. It was a charmer. The wasp woman was surrounded and the villains together with the charmer took her hostage. Meanwhile, Tony Stark was collecting his costume in his tower, and suddenly a sorceress with her villains burst into him. He could not do anything because he was not in a suit and he was also kidnapped. All the Avengers began to be captured. Only Thor and Ant-Man remained. Thor received a notification on his Avengers card that a general gathering had been announced, but when he arrived there, he was captured by the sorceress's army. Hawkeye and Black Panther were watching everything from the roof. They managed to get into this castle, but they were immediately captured and then they told that in fact they didn't want to free the Avengers. They wanted to distract attention so that Ant-Man got into the lab and created a special weapon that would help them. He freed the Avengers and now the forces were equal. The battle between evil and good began. The Charmer's team began to lose and the Charmer escaped, thereby betraying her team. A few days later, an Ant-Man and a Wasp woman flew to a military base that studied space threats. A woman and a man who watched the cosmos worked on it. She showed an image of space on which there was a strange flying object that moved faster than a comet or asteroid. It was supposed to fly past the satellite, but it turned around and shot down a satellite, and after a few seconds this object had already fallen to the ground. They took a car and went to the crash site. They arrived at the crash site, but there was no one there. Suddenly they started shooting at them from behind. He was very fast and invisible. It was some kind of space robot. After a while the robot left them in because he had another goal. He went to the laboratory where they studied space. He went into the laboratory and was about to destroy it, but the Ant-Man did not let him do it. Then the robot electrocuted him and destroyed the laboratory anyway. It turns out there was a man on this base, but in fact he was not from this planet. His name was Marvel. He told a story that he lived on a planet where there were two clans who were constantly at war and one of the clans sent one of his robots to Earth. There was a mega bomb in this robot. If he sees danger for himself in this world, he will blow up the whole planet. The Avengers went to the place where the robot was. They will have to stop him. Marvel said in order to disable the bomb, it was necessary to disassemble the robot and disable the bomb. But the robot was so high-tech that it was impossible to get close to it. Even the Avengers could not cope with it. To defeat him, it was necessary to get into the robot's head. The Wasp woman did it. She shrank to a small size and climbed through the gap into the head and turned off the robot. But there was another problem. The bomb was supposed to explode in 5 minutes, and Marvel could defuse it in 10 minutes. Then he took this bomb and flew into space. He flew into space and left the bomb where it would not harm anyone, since the bomb would explode soon. He also had to explode too, but Iron Man saved him and he remained alive.
The video begins with how, somewhere in the north, sled dogs were carrying people. The dogs stopped near the mountain, and people went to study a cave in this mountain. When they approached the cave, they saw that there were gates at the entrance. One of them tried to open them, but when he touched them, his hand immediately became covered with ice. They broke down the gate and went on. Along the way they had frozen Vikings. As if they had been there for a long time, they went out into a huge room where there was a chest. One of them tried to open this chest, but immediately completely covered with ice. Another man whose name was Elf came up and took the contents of the chest. Meanwhile, half of the Avengers were resting in the sun, and the other half was busy fighting the villain who shot radiation rays. He was very strong. They tried to prevent the villain from reaching the reactor. If he absorbed his power, he would become invulnerable, but suddenly Thor accidentally threw him into the reactor. Thor realized that if he does nothing, the villain will absorb all the energy, and Thor with his lightning broke the capsules in which there was jet water to flood the whole building, and the whole building flooded. Meanwhile, an enchantress came to the cave through the portal to the elf. She came to pick up the casket that the elf found, but the elf was not going to give up his find. He opened the casket and froze them. He was not going to stop only at the enchantress. He opened the casket and released the cold all over the world. At the same time, the Avengers were in the city when suddenly snow began to fall from the sky, followed by a strong and cold wind. They did not understand where the snow came from in the summer. The whole world froze and all the water turned into ice. The Hulk was swimming in the pool and did not have time to get out of it when the frost started. The water turned into ice and the Hulk froze at the bottom of the pool. Thor knew why it was snowing. He knew that such a winter could only be caused by a casket that was hidden in a cave, and to stop this winter you need to find and hide it. The Avengers did not know where to look for the casket, but Black Panther, thanks to his skills, was able to find out that the casket was in Norway. Suddenly Jarvis reported that in the city is in trouble and that ice monsters are walking around the city. Captain America tried to destroy one of them, but suddenly several more appeared out of the snow. They were getting more and more, but then the Hulk appeared and he easily began to destroy the ice demons. Iron Man, Thor, and Black Panther took a plane to Norway to stop the winter, but suddenly their engines froze and they crashed. They reached the cave where the casket stood, but there was an elf sitting next to this casket. Thor tried to throw his hammer at him, but the elf immediately froze him. The elf told about his plan. He said that he was going to unleash the same dark elves as him so that they would take over the whole world. The elf tried to freeze Iron Man and Black Panther, but Iron Man had technology that did not allow this. Then he ordered his wolves to attack them, but they did it with them too. Meanwhile, more and more dark spirits appeared in New York and they began to drive the Avengers into a corner. They could not be destroyed because they did not have a body. At the same time, Iron Man freed Thor. The villain elf tried to absorb the Black Panther, but his vibranium suit did not let him do it. Thor called lightning and hit the elf with it, but it did no harm to the elf. The Avengers were already frozen, but Iron Man suggested the idea. The idea was that Thor hit his suit with lightning, thereby increasing the power of the costume, and the elf turned out to be destroyed. Thor crawled up to the casket and closed it, thereby stopping the cold all over the world. Dark spirits disappeared along with the cold. Suddenly someone hit the Avengers with an electric shock. It was the Enchantress. She took the casket and immediately teleported from this place. Thor also opened the portal and wanted to chase her, but the force prevented him from opening it. The Avengers had another training session for which Hawkeye was supposed to hit the apple, but suddenly, during the shot, their electricity went out. Iron Man realized that the electricity was turned off by electromagnetic pulses. They went upstairs and were about to leave the building. They opened the door and saw the Black Widow behind it. He came for help. The Hulk, he immediately grabbed her and pressed her against the wall. Since all the Avengers thought that she was working for Hydra, but she explained this by saying that Fury ordered her to infiltrate Hydra so that she was a spy. He told her that the head of Hydra ordered her to steal one space cube with which to teleport in time. She explained why she did not contact Fury. Fury created a special frequency so that he could communicate with the Black Widow, but when the Black Widow tried to contact him, Fury for some reason did not respond. Suddenly the building shook and the Avengers flew into the city. They flew up to the city and they saw how the villains were attacking the city. The Avengers were saving the city from the villains. Iron Man discovered which of the planes the space cube was in, but suddenly his suit turned off and he fell. He was surrounded by two large robots. He tried to fly away, but his suit didn't work. The robot was about to shoot, but then a wasp woman appeared and saved him. The Avengers, meanwhile, were destroying the villains. Suddenly a Hydra plane flew up to them and the Ant-Man increased in size to grab him, because there should have been a space cube on him, but it was a distraction. Meanwhile, a villain named Modok fell on a plane to Earth and his cosmic cube fell out of the plane. The head of Hydra tried to steal this cube, but Ant-Man did not let him do it. Thor and Black Panther arrived to help the Avengers. Now they had more chances to defeat evil. Meanwhile, Captain America was fighting with the head of Hydra. He sucked all the power out of Captain America, but Hawkeye came to the rescue and he helped restore the power to Captain America. They handcuffed him and now all the villains go to jail. All the Avengers returned to the base and began to discuss the past day. The next day came and the Avengers were already on a mission. They were in the subway and there were villains in front of them who took ordinary people hostage. But suddenly Ant-Man appeared and said that he would try to persuade the villains to surrender with the help of words, since he knows them. But the villains went on the attack. The villains were strong. One of them could lift a whole train car and throw it at Thor. Each was unique in its own way, but the Avengers eventually managed to drive them away. The Avengers were surprised why Ant-Man tried to talk to them and convince them, but Ant-Man just left without listening to them. Ant-Man came to the Avengers base to his laboratory. He told the robot that he could not do this anymore, that he was tired of fighting with villains. He wanted to find another way to stop villains, but not by violence. The robot said that this world was doomed, and that his analysis led to the conclusion that humanity was becoming more and more worse and worse. Meanwhile, the Wasp Woman tried to convince the Avengers to persuade Ant-Man to stay in the Avengers, but they did not want to do this. Thor asked Iron Man to help him return him to his planet Asgard, but suddenly the Hulk burst in. He brought a gang of monkeys who were rioting in the city. Meanwhile, the Wasp Woman tried to convince Ant-Man to stay in the Avengers, but he did not want to stay there because the Avengers fought all the villains with violence, and the Wasp Woman began to leave when suddenly he heard the screams of Ant-Man. She saw Ant-Man lying unconscious. She flew up to him, and suddenly the Ant-Man robot grabbed her from behind. Meanwhile, Iron Man was fixing the system of their base. But when he connected his suit to detect a problem in the system, suddenly his suit froze as if it had broken. Thor came over to see what was happening, and suddenly Iron Man shot Thor. Tony Stark didn't control this suit. At the same time, the Hulk and the Black Panther were immersing the villains from their plane when suddenly the light began to blink. The Hulk went into the plane to put the villains' capsules, and suddenly the plane closed and began to fly itself. The Black Panther stayed on the ground, and another plane flew out at him and started shooting with a machine gun. Only Captain America and Hawkeye remained. They went into the training room, and suddenly the doors closed behind them. Since it was a training room, there were a lot of training weapons in this room. Someone programmed them so that they started shooting at the Avengers to death. Meanwhile, the Wasp Woman was captured by the robot. The robot said that his task was to restore order in this world, but he said that this was impossible while the Avengers were alive. His program had flaws. This program does not allow to destroy the Avengers, but the robot is trying to fix it. Meanwhile, Iron Man tried to kill Thor, but it wasn't him who controlled the suit, and there was nothing he could do about it. And at the same time, in the training room, Hawkeye and Captain America somehow dodged the missiles that were fired at them. Captain America was able to destroy the control panel, and all weapons stopped firing. Thor figured out how to stop Tony Stark's suit. He hid his suit, thereby disabling it. When Tony Stark entered the program of his suit, he realized that his suit was hacked by a robot. The Avengers broke into their base to destroy the robot. Thor tried to destroy the robot, but he shot him with a powerful laser so that even Thor's hammer cracked. The robot easily overcame the Avengers because he knew all their vulnerabilities. The Wasp Woman increased in size and hit the robot, but he got up again and continued to defeat the Avengers. Suddenly, Ant-Man came in and uttered the code that turned off the robot. The robot turned off for a few seconds, but it turned on again. The Hulk came to the rescue. He was able to tear the robot in half, thereby destroying it, and Ant-Man destroyed all the programs of this robot. Good again defeated evil, and the Avengers once again won. The story begins with how some villain hacked the satellite. At that time, a submarine was floating somewhere on the ground underwater. It was also hacked, and its system failed. The one who hacked gave the command to the command post to launch nuclear missiles. Suddenly, the villain's face appeared on the screen. It was the robot Ultron. He told that he is a very intelligent intellect. He told about his plan. His plan was to save humanity. But in order to save humanity, he wanted to completely exterminate all people. Meanwhile, the Avengers were at their base, and they could not believe that their comrade from the previous unit had died, and now someone had to remove his hammer. But no one could lift it, since only Thor could do it. At this time, Ant-Man and Iron Man were destroying everything that was left of the robot. This Ant-Man created the Ultron robot, but not for malicious purposes. He did not know yet that his robot was currently hacking the Pentagon and wanted to release nuclear missiles. Ant-Man created this robot to improve people's lives, but it turned out that the robot has become a villain. Suddenly, someone hacked their system too, and someone started controlling Tony Stark's suits. The Avengers were walking through Stark Tower when suddenly the biggest Tony Stark suit came out on them and started attacking them. Someone remotely controlled this suit. 3 more flew behind this suit, and they surrounded the Avengers. Suddenly, one of them, Kostyumov, spoke, and the Avengers realized that this voice belonged to Ultron. At the same time, the villain Ultron made his way to S.H.I.E.L.D.'s ship. They tried to destroy him, but his suit was too durable. He needed secret information that only S.H.I.E.L.D. had. Meanwhile, the Avengers tried to fend off Tony Stark's crazed suits. The suits were very durable, and the battle with them was not easy for them. Tony Stark had a suit. It was his very first suit that he created. This suit could not hack Ultron because it had little electrical technology. He arrived to the Avengers to help them. He had to destroy his own suits. Hulk and Iron Man went to the S.H.I.E.L.D. ship to stop Ultron. Meanwhile, Ultron tried to find out the codes, but the woman didn't tell him anything. Then he started scanning her brain to get information, but then the Hulk flew in with Iron Man and prevented him from doing it. Ultron was so strong that he easily scattered the Avengers around. Now Ultron had the codes for nuclear missiles, and he gave the command to launch all nuclear missiles in the world to destroy humanity. Many rockets started taking off from all over the world. Meanwhile, Black Panther and Hawkeye were fighting with Tony Stark's suits. The suit wanted to kill Black Panther, but suddenly lightning struck the suit. It turns out it was Thor. Everyone thought he was dead, but no, he was alive. Thor immediately flew to the S.H.I.E.L.D. ship to stop Ultron. Only his power could allow him to do so. While Thor was fighting Ultron, Tony Stark was trying to hack nuclear missiles to destroy them. Ant-Man shrank in size and got into Ultron's head and was able to destroy his system. The missiles were already flying up to the city, but Tony Stark was able to blow them up before they could reach the city. The next day came and the Avengers gathered in the main room to present the news to Thor. Tony Stark said that he had created a portal that could help Thor move to different worlds. Since Thor lived in another world, he needed to return there sometimes, and Tony Stark helped him with this. At the same time, Ant-Man, he was collecting things in his room. He wanted to leave, and the Wasp Woman tried to stop him. But the Ant-Man thought that he was to blame for what the robot Ultron did and therefore left. The Wasp Woman could not convince him and he left. Captain America gathered all the Avengers in the hall and told the story that one day Captain America and his partner named Bucky made their way to the Hydra base. They saw how the head of Hydra, the Red Skull, created a portal and through it drew monsters into this world that he controlled with collars. He collected an army of monsters to take over the world. The Avengers flew out to this place. The Avengers arrived to the north and flew into the cave. The device showed that there was a very powerful energy in this cave, and when they flew into it, they saw a glowing stone. The Wasp Woman tried to take it, but suddenly a huge stone fell from above. It turns out it wasn't a stone. It was a huge green goblin. The Wasp Woman stopped responding by radio. Meanwhile, Iron Man arrived at another cave and found the same stone. He tried to take it, but suddenly someone attacked him from behind. It was a villain named Laser. All these caves with magic stones were traps for the Avengers. Captain America also found the same stone, and when he approached him, several missiles flew into him from somewhere, but he managed to close his shield, thereby saving himself. Each superhero was looking for these stones individually, and when they were looking for them individually, they were easier to grab. Meanwhile, Thor found the most important magic stone. He informed the Avengers about it, but suddenly a charmer appeared from the portal with the villain Zemo, and Thor realized that this was a trap. Zemo gave a command to his people to turn off all communication to the Avengers. The connection was turned off and the Avengers began to lose to the villains. If the Avengers had not split up, they would have together and have already defeated the villains with a cunning plan. Suddenly the stones began to activate. It turns out they were not just stones, they were stones. If they were united, they could open portals, and monsters came through these portals. It was Zemo's plan to destroy people. Thor was held hostage by Zemo. Zemo wanted to kill him, but Thor pulled his hammer and hit him. Now he was free and could save the world from monsters. Thor said that in order to close the portals, it was necessary for every superhero to break a stone. The Avengers broke the stones and the portals closed. Thor woke up on his planet Asgard. He woke up near the throne where his brother Loki was sitting. Loki was a bad man. He dishonestly took this throne. Hawkeye woke up in the forest. A herd of horses ran past him. He did not understand how he got here and what was happening here. He came out of the forest and he realized that he was in space on a small piece of earth. He stopped an elf on a horse and asked what was going on here. The elf said that Hawkeye needed to run because Loki's army is already approaching them and immediately galloped away. Hawkeye did not understand anything and suddenly mad wolves began to surround him. Meanwhile, Thor was in Asgard. He was a prisoner. It was Loki who locked him up and tortured him. Loki told about her plan. His plan was to capture all 9 worlds. He wanted all the worlds to bow before him. Loki had already captured all the worlds except planet Earth, and he was not going to stop. Meanwhile, Ant-Man turned out to be somewhere in the north. He also already realized that they were in another world. He was carrying a Wasp Woman in his hands. She was unconscious. Suddenly someone tried to kill him with a big axe. Ant-Man increased in size and ran to attack. At that moment, Captain America tried to contact the Avengers, but his connection did not work. He was also in another world. Suddenly spirits began to appear around him. They said why Captain America did not save them. These were people whom Captain America could not save from death. He always remembered them. At the same time, the Hulk woke up underwater. He swam up and saw old carts passing by him. The Hulk realized that he was in the Middle Ages. He saw that people were being transported in these cages. He stood in front of them and the orcs ran to attack. They did not yet know what the Hulk was capable of. Meanwhile, Iron Man woke up from the fact that he was dragged by orcs. He also did not understand what was happening. It turns out the orcs were good. They introduced themselves and told that Iron Man is in the kingdom of Nightabili. They asked how he got here, but Tony did not remember. He only remembered how he destroyed the magic stone. At that moment someone broke into the cave. It was a big evil orc. He scattered the orcs around. Then Tony Stark shot at him and he was thrown aside. Meanwhile, Hawkeye was fighting with wolves. They began to corner him, but an elf on a horse came to the rescue and took him away. The wolves chased them, but Hawkeye took the elf's bow. This bow was magical and destroyed all the wolves. At the same time, Thor was talking to Loki. Loki said that he specifically ordered the Enchantress to find a team of enemies for the Avengers, so that while they were fighting with them, he carried out his large-scale plan to capture all the worlds. Loki said that all the superheroes were trapped and were doomed to death. He said that he specially created all sorts of villains and sent them to planet Earth so that the Avengers would fight them and think they were heroes, and while they were fighting, Loki captured worlds. But Loki didn't know that the Avengers had almost defeated all the villains. Loki opened the door to a large room and took Thor there. It was a room for executions. Thor was also to be executed. At this time, the Hulk was fighting with ice monsters. He began to lose, and suddenly Ant-Man flew out of the portal. He joined the Hulk. But that wasn't enough. Then Hawkeye and Black Panther joined them and together they were able to defeat the villains. After a long time, the Avengers will finally meet. Meanwhile, Loki was in his garden. He had a tree that filled him with powers. His servant came to him and said that they had some problems. This problem was the Avengers. Loki thought that he had already defeated them. Loki took out a horn and started blowing into it. A sound was coming from this horn, and this sound was calling the biggest monster. The Avengers were very surprised at the sight of him. It was an ice wolf that could release ice. But the Avengers were not going to give up. They united their forces, and they were able to destroy him. Now it was Loki's turn. The Avengers ran to attack, but Loki easily overcame them, since he was very strong. Loki destroyed the shield of Captain America. The captain could not believe it because this shield could not be broken. Suddenly Iron Man flew in. He had to create a new suit in uncomfortable conditions, but he made it. This suit was created from a rare metal that could not be broken. While Iron Man distracted Loki, the Avengers freed Thor. Now Thor was free and could fight with his brother Loki. To take away Loki's power, it was necessary to destroy the tree of power that Loki had. Ant-Man was able to pull out this tree along with the roots and Loki's power was gone. Now it was easy to defeat him. Loki was defeated. The Avengers gathered with the people of Asgard, and all the people thanked the Avengers for defeating the villains. Hello, 99% watch without a subscription. Please subscribe. The morning of Spider-Man begins not with orange juice, but with listening to threats from J. Jonah Jameson from a huge screen in the center of New York. Spider-Man studied at school and that's where he was going now. Before studying, he needs to buy a pie for Aunt May and also save a policeman who lost control. It turned out that the accident was rigged by a villain named Tripster. Since Peter became Spider-Man, he has already fought with this tube of glue 3 times, but not once could not defeat him. On the 4th attempt, he couldn't screw up. That's how it happened. Spider-Man plugged web glue guns Tripster and they exploded and all the glue poured on the villain. Spider-Man was about to leave, but noticed that the glue man's eyes widened significantly with horror and the spider's instinct did not work. The spider's sense is like an early warning system about danger. It turned out that everything was fine with the instinct, and the villain's eyes widened due to the fact that the S.H.I.E.L.D. spaceship descended right over the city. Nick Fury came down to the ground to Spider-Man, who called him to talk to the superhero about the fact that after his battles with the villains, there is a huge damage to the city. Nick said that even Iron Man was a beginner and was in exactly the same situation. Nick offered Spider to become his disciple in order to make Peter a real hero who benefits. Peter refused and went to school. On his way to school, he was spotted by Mr. Osborn's camera. He had been watching the Spider for a long time and wanted to get his abilities and recreate the army of Spider warriors. Arriving at school, Peter met his closest friend Mary Jane. Mary has long dreamed of working in the company of John Jameson since Jameson was one of the most popular journalists at that time. In the hallway, May and Peter noticed Harry Osborn. A few years ago, Harry helped Peter, and from that moment they became best friends. But not everyone at this school loved the Spider. Flash had locked Peter in a locker since elementary school and humiliated him until high school. But at the moment nothing has changed. Peter was back in the locker with the door closed. After a while, May, Peter, and Harry had lunch in the dining room and discussed the situation that happened in the morning with Harry. Suddenly, the Spider's instinct began to get stronger and stronger, and after a while 4 villains broke into the school. During the fight in the morning, Tripster stuck a bug on Spider-Man's suit that calculated the spider deposit. Peter was able to distract the villains and quickly change into a costume. During his fight with the villains, Harry was badly wounded. Harry's father, who was watching everything that was happening through the cameras, since he sent the villains to the school to find out what the Spider was capable of, he immediately came for Harry. Peter blamed himself very much for everything that happened with Harry and the school. When he got home, he remembered that he had not bought Uncle Ben's favorite pie. Today was his birthday, but unfortunately Peter and his aunt were celebrating alone. Uncle Ben is dead. Sitting in his room, Peter realized that Nick was right and the Spider still had to learn and learn. He made the decision to become Fury's apprentice. The Spider has already climbed onto the ship, but he was not very warmly welcomed. The security system thought that there was an outsider on the ship and began firing at Spider-Man from all sides. But fortunately, Fury came to the rescue very timely and did not let Spider-Man die. The very next morning, the Spider began training. Not only Nick looked after him, but also some of his students. They argued that a human could not defeat robots, and Peter could not. Since Harry didn't go to school, Peter brought him his notes and homework so that Harry could catch up. Mr. Osborn offered Peter a ride to school and they left. Mary met Parker at school. She put up ads all over the school that were addressed to Spider-Man. Mary wanted to interview him and tell his real story. The Spider came back to practice in the Shield. This time, he was provided with the latest development, or to be more precise, a bike that was designed specifically for him. During his testing, Spider-Man fell off the ship. The web ended and he couldn't stop. Nick Fury helped the Spider land, but since Parker didn't even have a license, he just drove around New York at high speed, unable to stop the bike. If Nick's students hadn't helped him, it wouldn't have ended well. Nick suggested that Parker take control of the heroes who were still young and not experienced, but Peter refused. He was afraid that he would have to answer for everything that happened to him. Fury could not convince the Spider and he left the training. Peter sat and thought about whether he had done the right thing or not, but the Spider's instinct distracted him from his thoughts. The Spider tried to understand where the danger was coming from, but did not have time. From the building, he was attacked by villains who recently attacked the school. They made it so that the Spider couldn't move. They needed this in order to deliver it to the customer without any problems. But superheroes came to Peter's aid, which he recently refused. Together, they were able to defeat the villains and save people. J. Jonah Jameson was again dissatisfied with Spider-Man, but Norman was even more dissatisfied with him, to whom the Spider was never delivered. He told Otto Octavius that he would not tolerate another disappointment. Spider-Man changed his mind and took on the young heroes, but with one condition. He wanted to act not only as a team, but also alone, and Nick agreed. And the next day at school he was in for a surprise. The whole team of heroes moved to his school because the Shield decided that they needed a break from training. Peter didn't like it very much, but Nick wanted to keep an eye on him, and so he resigned himself and continued to live on. The guys have already settled into school so much that they even started communicating with Peter's friends. Spider didn't like it at all. He had a fight with Sam because he sat down at the table where Mary, Harry, and Peter usually dined. The headmaster of the school was a hidden agent of Sheeta, and as soon as he saw that they were quarreling, he called them to the detector. But in fact, he called them and the rest of the team in order to send them via an underground path to the spaceship. The task that day was to defeat robots with lasers. Sam and Spider bet that one of them would be the first to defeat 10 robots, but they had a draw. A little later they found out that the task was not to defeat the robots, but simply to pass them unnoticed. As punishment, Nick Fury forced the entire team to clean up all the garbage they left behind. In order to regain Nick's trust, they decided to catch some villains from the Shield list. Their choice fell on the most powerful and elusive villain. Spider-Man hesitated at first, but then decided that they would go to catch him. The team was already flying up to the island where the villain was and noticed strange flashes in the sky. It turned out that he was being chased by a huge number of missiles and robots. The team started attacking but realized that Dr. Doom was too strong. They wanted to perform a maneuver, but Spider-Man and Nova beat them and together whitewashed the Duma. After loading into the ship, they went to the S.H.I.E.L.D. ship. As soon as they got there, he immediately went to Nick to show his booty. But Nick was not happy about this news at all. He informed the superheroes that they had dragged an armed supervillain onto the ship who only pretended that they had defeated him. Dr. Doom divided into 6 such supervillains and the battle began. The bots dispersed throughout the ship and the team of heroes had to disperse. During the battle, one of the bots blew up the engine and the ship began to descend towards the city. Spider had an idea. He asked Sam to hold the ship from below as he was the only one in the team who could fly, and the rest of the team got into the hull with the reactor because Dr. Doom was there. Superheroes should not have allowed Doom to break the reactor, and therefore, after jumping through several floors, they got into the hull with the reactor. Doom had already sent a stream of energy into the reactor, but Sam was able to close it and take the blow on himself. The rest of the heroes came to his aid and together they were able to defeat the most terrible and powerful villain. But even that couldn't calm Nick down. He was very angry at them and asked whose idea it was. Spider-Man took a step forward and said it was him, but the rest of the team followed him. Nick saw that the team had become more cohesive and softened a little. Hello, 99% watch without a subscription. Please subscribe. Iron Man and the Wasp Woman flew to his base. They met with Susan. The girls went to talk and the Iron Man flew to a friend. Tony, that's the name of the Iron Man. He said that he noticed a surge of powerful energy. He also said that you can get to Asgard to Thor in other ways and not just through the main entrance. The girls were walking down the corridor and chatting. The Wasp Woman was telling about her interesting adventures. At this time, Hulk, Captain America, and other Avengers were playing cards and chatting. Johnny, that was the name of the Man of Fire, was offended that Captain America did not know who he was. The game was coming to an end. The Hulk realized that he was losing and began to fight with the Sandman. They were quickly calmed down, and we see that a creature similar to a robot is watching them imperceptibly. Some villain also started following the girls who were having fun chatting. It turns out that the robots passed all the information to their owner. The owner ordered action, and suddenly all the buildings where the Avengers were began to explode, including the Tony Stark Tower. After the explosion, Tony Stark woke up and started looking for the doctor. He found him and picked him up. There was another explosion and robots ran out of the smoke and attacked them. At this time, the Wasp Woman was also fighting robots. The robots were very strong and equipped with various weapons. Iron Man successfully repelled all attacks and destroyed the robots. The rest of the Avengers were also attacked and all fought together against them. But suddenly Black Panther suggested that this was a distraction since it was pointless to attack strong Avengers. Iron Man and the Doctor were surrounded and they already thought they were going to die. But suddenly the robots retreated and turned off. Sue and the Wasp Woman were captured by the villains. Iron Man started to catch up with the plane to save them. He got on the plane and found the girls. Suddenly, the villain entered the same compartment and threw Iron Man out of the plane with a powerful weapon. All the Avengers gathered and began to think about how to save Susan and the Wasp Woman. The Wasp Woman woke up in some kind of dome. She tried to break it, but she failed. Susan was lying in another balloon at the time. It turns out they were abducted by Dr. Doom. The Avengers flew up to the tower of the villain Duma on their plane. Missiles were aimed at them, but the plane successfully dodged them. Iron Man made his way into the room to the villains, but they noticed him. The real battle has begun. The Hulk and the Sandman jumped from the plane into the tower. The Sandman landed right on top of the robot. The Hulk began to fight with the main villain Doom, but he used a special weapon and the Hulk fell from the tower. The Avengers destroyed all the robots and the most important villain remained. Doom said he would never give up. The Avengers began to fight with him, but Doom successfully coped with everyone and repelled all attacks. The villain Doom sat on his throne and said that the Avengers had infiltrated a foreign country and the country of America would now have problems because of this. Therefore, the Avengers freed the girls and quickly left the Duma. Iron Man promised him that they would meet and Captain America would take revenge on him. The next day came and it began with how there was a Hydra base somewhere in the mountains. People from Hydra were carrying a container in which there was an evil and powerful creature. Suddenly this creature blew up the container and got free. People from Hydra tried to catch it, but there was a lot of smoke from the explosion and this monster could not be seen. But one soldier shot and hit him. The monster was put back in the container. Meanwhile, Stark had an interview at the tower where his partners offered an idea for making money, but Tony was not interested. He was going about his business. Pepper came into the room and the meeting ended. Pepper told that their company was losing profits due to the fact that Tony was spending more time on the Avengers and he didn't have time for business, but the conversation was interrupted by a call to the Avengers card. Captain America said that they needed his help in his basement. While Tony was trying to finish the conversation, 4 vans drove up to his tower. These vans were very suspicious. People from Hydra got out of the van. There was some equipment in these vans. This equipment was started and it created an impulse that turned off all the electricity in the tower. Pepper went out to check what was going on, but the Hydra people were already in the tower and they took her hostage. They went into the tower and brought a container. A monster snake got out of this container. The people from Hydra programmed it so that it could find Stark's technology. The monster started scanning the building to find Stark, and he did it. Tony Stark realized that the power outage was not a coincidence, and meanwhile the people from Hydra downloaded all the information from Stark's servers. They wanted to get into a large safe in which there were the most powerful Stark suits. They began to melt the door to the safe, but they did not yet know that Captain America and Black Panther were inside this safe. They destroyed half of Hydra's people and prevented them from entering the safe. At the same time, the monster attacked Stark. This monster needed Tony's reactor, which was in his chest. They ran away from the monster. Pepper informed Tony that the villains wanted to blow up their main reactor to blow up the entire Stark Tower, but the monster caught up with him and he started trying to take the reactor inside his chest. Tony yelled from pain and a woman from the S.H.I.E.L.D. agency came to the rescue. Meanwhile, Captain America, Black Panther, and Rhodes fought with the rest of the villains. Rhodes decided to take Tony Stark's costume to destroy all the villains, and he did it. The Hydra people downloaded all the secret data and were about to leave, but Captain America and Black Panther did not let them do it. Tony Stark was finally able to take his suit, and now they had a better chance of winning. The reactor was about to explode. Tony decided to throw the monster into this reactor so that it would explode with him, and he did it. The rest of the villains took Pepper hostage and were about to fly away, but the Avengers blocked their way and did not let them leave. Then the villain threatened to kill Pepper, but Pepper herself was able to defeat him. Everything was fine, and even Captain America did not let the villain steal a disc with valuable Tony Stark development. Meanwhile, Thor was in his world called Asgard. He communicated with the head of the country. Thor said that he wanted to go to planet Earth to save the world from the villainous Enchantress, but the head said that everything would be fine with the planet. At the same time, the Avengers were cleaning up the hangar. In this hangar, they were looking for a villain named Laser. They knew that he was here, but when they found him, he was frozen. Tony called Captain America and reported that he had found another villain who was immured and stood like a golden statue. The Avengers arrived at the Avengers base. They could not understand why the villains stood like monuments. At this time, Iron Man and the Wasp arrived at another hangar. In this hangar, there was a villain who was glued to the ceiling. Tony tried to inform the Avengers about his find, but for some reason his connection did not work. The Avengers broke into their base. They suspected that someone else was on it, and they were not mistaken. The villain Zemo and his assistants were standing in one of the rooms. But they did not come to fight. They came for help. The Avengers ran to attack and the battle began. But this battle was stopped by the villain. The Avengers stopped to listen to Zemo. Zemo said that the Enchantress declared war on him after they failed one operation to capture the world. He did not have time to finish when suddenly Iron broke into the base man. Iron Man didn't understand at first why the Avengers didn't attack the villains. The Avengers decided that they would help the villains, but after they help them, then immediately after that the villains will surrender and they will be put in jail. Meanwhile, somewhere in space, the Enchantress tried to freeze another villain. She was able to grab him and was about to kill him, but suddenly an Iron Man with a Hawkeye appeared, and now there was more chance to save the villain. Meanwhile, Black Panther came up with a card that could take away the Enchantress's powers for a while. Black Panther began to show Captain America and Zemo this card, but they were interrupted by a siren, which meant that someone else entered their base. It was one of Zemo's friends. He asked to hide because the Enchantress was running after him, but when the Black Panther scanned him, he saw that it was not his friend, but a charmer who could transform into any person. The Enchantress was discovered and she tried to kill Zemo. Captain America had to turn on the machine that took power from the Enchantress, but the captain did not specifically turn it on. Then Zemo took out the Norn Stone, which could repel the Enchantress's magic. The Iron Man started the car and the Enchantress lost her strength. Zemo realized that he was no longer in danger and ordered the villains to destroy the Avengers. One of the villains accidentally got into the machine to absorb the Force, and the Enchantress again had powers that she immediately used. The Avengers were able to stop her. The Avengers were already at their base and discussed today, and the Enchantress went to hell where the devil tormented her.